Number one, he absolutely is a crackpot. He has pushed miasma theory, terrain theory.
If we did not have vaccination in the United States, maybe that's 200 or 300 or 400, but that's way too many children to die of a disease that is completely preventable, almost 100% by a vaccine.
Well, again, I think he's in an impossible position. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of vaccine technology.
He continues to push lies about vaccines causing autism, just all manner of blatant pseudoscience.
But to somehow equate those types of treatment with the efficacy of the vaccine is just not true.
I think the chances that we will deal with another pandemic are actually, unfortunately, tightly correlated with our cryptic bioweapons research.
Yeah, Brett just basically peddles conspiracies to generate a cult following online.
We don't put the money prospectively into access to preventative care, access to healthy foods. So the entire reimbursement system almost guarantees that we maintain a sick society.
I'm a little alarmed that both of them had anything positive to say about RFK. I don't think that there is really anything positive that you can say about him. He's been a complete train wreck.
That reimbursement system absolutely needs to be changed to be a health promoting system and not a sick care system.
Why, if the experts have been so expert, why is America so unhealthy?
I mean, look, it's poverty. This veneer of concern about nutrition and public health, it's a facade. It's just a smokescreen.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so we got a bit of a different Piers Morgan Uncensored video coming in for you guys today. We're going to get into all kind of different subjects, right? We're going to talk about vaccine efficacy, the science behind all this. There's a pretty good debate right here at the beginning. And then Professor Dave comes in.
He knows a lot about all kinds of stuff. Professor Dave explains.
Now, look, I'm going to get this right off the top. I love Professor Dave. His takedowns of the flat earth community in totality have been just utterly epic. And, that's not it. It doesn't stop there. He goes after a lot of pseudo-scientific grifters, if you will, and takes these guys down too. However, there's a lot of times where his partisanship bleeds through. And we're going to go over that today. He's trying to come in, and his rant is just filled with half-truths and sophistry. So we're going to get into all that. But before we do, y'all do me a big favor. Smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here, and check out my regular videos. We go over news and politics, and we analyze news and break down all the manipulations and all that good stuff. So y'all make sure and check those out. Share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. And if you would be so inclined, click that join button. I'd love to have you aboard. But without any further ado, let's get into it, y'all.
I met one of the people behind the AstraZeneca vaccine, one of the Oxford guys, and he said to me that we really dodged a bullet. He said, because if COVID had had the death rate, particularly with young people, of something like the Black Death, then it would have been an exponentially much more serious thing. And that maybe the lessons we learned from the COVID pandemic will be extremely useful in dealing with the next thing that comes. And his prediction was that I'll come to you here, Brett Weinstein, that it's highly likely that we're going to have to deal with another pandemic of some sort, and it could be a lot more serious next time. But the lessons we learned with this actually could be very beneficial. Would you agree with that?
No. I think the chances that we will deal with another pandemic are actually, unfortunately, tightly correlated with our cryptic bioweapons research, disguised in the US as dual-use research. Were we to put dual-use research to bed, the chances of a serious pandemic that requires an intervention like a rapidly deployed mRNA vaccine is actually surprisingly low. And the stories that we use to justify such a response do not turn out to endure scrutiny. So, for example, the 1918 flu pandemic would not happen again today for two different reasons. One, many of the people who died were actually victims of a bacterial pneumonia that we can now treat with antibiotics. And two, aspirin was, at the time, a new wonder drug, and the dosages that were given to people who contracted the flu are doses that are now understood to be fatal. So if we rerun the tape of history and we say, how often do diseases leap from nature that require a radical intervention? The answer is it's been a very long time since it's happened, and the likelihood of it happening again in an era where we are circulating globally and therefore we all have natural immunity to the diseases that we tend to encounter at some level or another, the chances that we encounter something that requires us to, put the world on pause and deploy a vaccine at lightning pace are low. I would also point out that, yes, in one sense, the mRNA platform solves a question, a pharmacological question, in that it can be deployed very rapidly. On the other hand, it carries a defect in its heart even beyond the tendency to trigger the immune system to attack your own tissues, and that is that the very nature of the platform requires the presentation of a very narrow antigenic set, which means that the viruses that we are confronting have a relatively easy problem to solve evolutionarily. Unlike natural immunity, where you become immune to an entire virus, your immunity to a single antigen is something that evolution can easily sidestep. So what we tend to do with a narrowly targeted platform like mRNA is drive the evolution of the virus, which may even prolong a pandemic.
Okay, so I'm going to say something right off top. I'm not a doctor. I am not an expert. I am just a guy that happens to look at logic and break things down logically. These guys are experts, but if you have any questions about vaccine efficacy, any sort of medical questions like that, go talk to your doctor. That is always the best advice. I'm sure these guys would give that same exact advice. Of course, they would probably give you their opinion because, once again, they are experts. But, it is what it is. Got to get that out of the way because that's always good advice to tell somebody, go talk to your own doctor first. But, this whole idea, I think he's right about a lot of things, but, he gets things kind of wrong. And a lot of other people get things kind of wrong because they'll hear that and be like, oh, well, let's just brush it off. We don't need to do all this research. Nonsense. I think we still need, we learned many good lessons from COVID, least of which is what the government does in situations like that. I think we learned some very valuable lessons and how to protect ourselves, if you will. All right, not necessarily talking about the effects of COVID itself, but the effects of the government's response to said pandemic, if you will. Now, this whole idea, though, that we can just brush off another pandemic, we have no idea when a pandemic, when some virus or bacteria or something like that's going to evolve, and we just don't know how to combat it, right off the top, and it takes out a bunch of people. We just don't know that. So this idea to brush this whole thing off, I think it's kind of nonsensical, but I don't want to interject too much into this, so we're going to keep going.
Brett Girard, you mentioned there the measles outbreak, which of course was in Texas and then spread to 40 other states. Your belief is that not enough children, I think, were getting their vaccines. How tricky is that for someone like RFK Jr. to navigate, and how did he navigate it in your estimation?
Well, it's a fact that the outbreak was primarily among people who are not immunized. I mean, measles is a highly contagious disease, one of the most contagious diseases. Sort of walk in the room, and you can catch it if you're not immune. And there were, likely legitimate reasons, religious-based reasons that many of the people were not immunized. In my following of that, though, and I think we all understood, it took quite a while for the secretary to advocate, and even then he advocated somewhat weakly for the measles vaccine, and instead went on to tangential issues like, vitamin A or other things to combat measles, which are in no way equivalent to the efficacy of a vaccine. So I think he wound up probably being in a reasonable spot after several weeks of sort of being wishy-washy on the issue. And again, I'm a pediatric ICU physician. I have treated measles. I've buried children with measles. And vitamin A, in the middle of Africa, where there's vitamin A deficiency, yes, there's an epidemiological association, but to somehow equate those types of treatment with the efficacy of the vaccine is just not true. So he certainly, I think he wound up in a reasonable place with this, but it took a while to get there.
Okay, so I don't really have any problems with what he said. I mean, what he said was pretty much true. You can't really argue with that. I just do want to dip into this idea, though, that, if RFK Jr., whoever's leading the HHS or whoever's the top guy in the nation over health or whatever that is, when there's some epidemic like that comes out, measles breaks out, if he doesn't immediately come out and endorse the vaccine, all of a sudden this is a bad thing. The sky is falling. Oh, he's a crackpot. He's a lunatic. Well, why? Why don't you think the best advice is not to listen to a lawyer and listen to your doctor instead of the guy that's running the administration? He's not a doctor, for crying out loud. Like, RFK Jr. is not a scientist. He's a lawyer. He is meant to run the agency. He's not meant to give out advice. That's not his position. But people rely on the advice of these administrative heads. And I just don't quite understand that. I get it, sure, but, we know that the heads of these days, sure, they may dip their toes into the science, into medicine, into whatever it may be, whatever agency it is, economics, finances, whatever that is. They may dip their toes. They have knowledge of that subject because they need to run an administration that is in charge of whatever that is. But you listen to the guys underneath, the guys that are experts, the guys that are doing the work. You don't listen to the guy that is meant to be in charge of the guys that are the experts. He's overseeing them. They're not overseeing him, right? He's not the one that is the expert. They are. So I just never understood this idea, like, let's listen to Joe Biden when he says the vaccines are going to keep you from spreading the disease. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Let's listen to Fauci when he says put on 2 masks. Like, come on. No, none of this makes any sense. Listen to your own doctor, for crying out loud. They know you the best. But let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, Brett Weinstein is an interesting test case, I felt, for RFK Jr. because his initial reaction was not to promote the vaccine, certainly publicly. Then he about-faced when some children died, and I assume he was fearful of this getting out of control. And at that point, he did advocate for the vaccine. What did you make of that journey he went on?
Well, again, I think he's in an impossible position. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of vaccine technology, both its benefits and its hazards. And I must say, although I am more vaccinated than almost anybody you know, as a tropical biologist, I've been vaccinated against a great many diseases, including things like rabies. My children are fully vaccinated. And in 2020, my wife and I published a book in which we argued that vaccines were one of the 3 greatest medical triumphs that modern medicine has to champion. I have become aware that we have several vaccine platforms, none of which are especially safe. Each has its own defects, and therefore the correct position should be one of great caution. When do we have a disease that is sufficiently serious and a vaccine that is sufficiently safe that the cost-benefit analysis argues in favor of it? Now, it is true that measles is dangerous in a modern context, but what Secretary Kennedy is highlighting is that a lot of that has to do with the vulnerability of the population. The ill health of the population renders it vulnerable and may force us into using a vaccine in order to limit the harms, but that comes at a massive cost. And long-term, the right answer is to fix the health of the population so that diseases like measles are again rendered controllable by other means.
I just think that's a naive view. It's a really naive view. You're not going to create populations that are healthy enough that they will not catch measles when they're young children. You're not going to create a population that's healthy enough that Ebola is not a fatal disease. I certainly agree that one of the principal causes of mortality in COVID, and probably why the U.S. had such a horrible mortality rate, is because the underlying health of our country, right? The healthier people are going to have a much better outcome, but you're not going to get to a point where something like measles that affects and kills children, not going to kill hundreds of thousands of children in the U.S. I mean, it kills over 100,000 children a year around the world. If we did not have vaccination in the United States, maybe that's 200 or 300 or 400, but that's way too many children to die of a disease that is completely preventable, almost 100% by a vaccine. So right. I agree with the premise. I agree with the premise. The healthier we are, the more we are resistant to disease. But to think that it's going to make us immune from these really severe diseases like measles, it's not going to happen.
So I want to respond to that.
Brett Weinstein?
It seems to me that you are confusing the issue of how contagious measles is with how dangerous it is. And I agree, you're not going to prevent people from catching measles simply by having them in excellent health. The question is what happens to them after they catch measles. And your point about the number of kids who would die of measles, I think we have to reevaluate in light of the poor health of our children. But even if the number was 200 a year in the US, let's say, you have to compare that with the harm done by the vaccines in other regards. For example, the production of allergies. How many kids die of asthma that is the result of an allergy that is triggered by an adjuvant in a vaccine? And let us just say,
I disagree with that set of facts because I absolutely disagree that the long-term effects of something like a measles vaccine, this has been well studied, trying to make a link between an adjuvant and a vaccine and long-term asthma is just not there. And I think we fundamentally are going to disagree with that. And I am not confusing contagion with seriousness. I am a pediatric ICU physician. I have treated measles. I have seen measles deaths. I've had people on ECMO for measles. It is a serious disease, even in a healthy population. Now, again, people who say we're going to have 100,000 deaths in the United States, they're completely overblowing it, right? The health of our population is not going to equate us to the rest of the world, where measles primarily deals with children who are undernourished, poor nutritional status, but we're still going to have, 3-digit kind of deaths in the United States. And that's unacceptable for a preventable disease like measles. And I think even RFK would agree and has agreed that measles is one of the vaccines that he is supportive of, as opposed to others where he may not be.
Well, I think his general position.
That's clear because he came. His
general position is one that I share, which is any vaccine that is net beneficial in a properly controlled study is a valid one. And I would agree also if measles turns out to reduce all-cause mortality, if the measles vaccine turns out to reduce all-cause mortality, then I think there's a very strong argument in favor of it. But the problem is that when one digs into the literature on the safety of these things, one does not find the properly controlled studies that would give you an idea of how many people we lose as a result of the vaccines as compared to how many people we lose as a result of the disease.
Okay, so what he just said right there at the end makes total sense to me. Now, people like Dave, they'll come in and call him a crackpot and call him delusional because he's bringing up concerns that these studies that have been done, they're not conclusive. Now, this is something I haven't read medical studies. I'm not going to lie about this. I've read a couple of studies, mostly on climate change, another one on social stuff, but we'll not get into that because we're talking about this. But every study I've read, which, like I said, has only been a couple, they were inconclusive. He's talking about these studies, they weren't done properly, they're inconclusive. What I find so fascinating is, once again, people like Dave will come in, they'll have this anaphylactic reaction to a question like that. Hey, hang on just a second, this study, yeah, it wasn't controlled properly. I have a few questions about this. And then he gets called a lunatic, a crackpot, a grifter, and all this other stuff for asking questions. And you'll see that, well, I've got the clips coming up here in a little bit, but I find that very fascinating. The reaction to this appeal to authority when you question that authority figure, this reaction of, well, you're insane. Am I? Or am I just asking questions? Because from what we can tell, these studies, some of them are done improperly, most of them are inconclusive. Well, how do you gain an answer after that point? Once again, talk to your doctor. But, we can't ignore the efficacy of vaccines because they are definitely effective for doing what we need them to do at the time. Now, as far as the side effects, all of that's inconclusive, folks. There are bad side effects. It's a case-by-case basis. What can we do at this point? Well, once again, it's a risk-benefit analysis. And I think a lot of people, they don't take into account that, when you don't take a vaccine and you could possibly spread some sort of disease, they don't take into account the fact of spreading that disease to other people and those people spreading the disease, right? When you actually choose not to take a vaccine. Now, look, I get it. We want to know if these vaccines are safe. And that is all RFK Jr. does. And he gets called a crackpot, a lunatic, a vaccine denier. He's anti-vax for questioning the safety of some of these vaccines. I think that's a very good question. He just wants, the studies released. Apparently, now, like I said, I haven't actually got into this. I haven't read the studies. But he is saying they won't release the findings from a lot of these studies. What do you do at that point, right? Just take his word for it? Honestly, they're raising genuine concerns. And I think when we get the response to those questions, you're a lunatic, yeah, I'm sorry, that only further calls into question what's actually going on here. But let's keep going.
Okay, let's just switch gears slightly. Brett Giroir, I want to talk about something we probably all agree with in the MAHA movement, which RFK is pushing, and that's his desire to remove certain chemicals, dyes, and additives from the food supply chain and to get America off its over-reliance on ultra-processed food. I always cite the example that I've got a place here in LA. I come here a lot. I love it. I love America. I love Americans. But, in England, if you buy a loaf of bread from a supermarket, within about 7 days, it starts to mold. Clearly, you can see it molding. In America, you can have the same loaf of bread or type of bread, and a month after you open it, it's still absolutely fine. That's not normal, and that's not healthy. And if you look at America's general health, obesity rates, and so on, I'm 100% behind RFK in trying to get America to wean itself off so much ultra-processed food and these dyes which are used everywhere. What is your view?
Well, I'm in strong agreement with that. I think the data on ultra-processed foods is pretty clear in that we don't know the exact factor, but if you take the same calorie, the same protein, the same carbohydrate, the same fat, and you put people on a diet where it's ultra-processed versus not, they gain weight and lose health on the ultra-processed foods, and they either maintain their weight or lose weight on the natural whole foods. So this is clearly true, and I think this could be one of his biggest triumphs, is to wean America off of ultra-processed foods, starting in schools where it's really a major issue. The dyes, look, I think there's not sort of direct correlations between many of these and terrible outcomes in health, but let's just face it, if you don't need to have a petroleum-based dye in your foods, why should we do that, right? We should have natural products. But clearly this movement, and it's not going to turn around in a year or two, but as the Assistant Secretary for Health, I was, the head public health person in Trump one administration, and clearly nutrition, obesity, and I always want to throw in something that he does personally, but maybe does not emphasize as much publicly, is physical activity is the second part of that. It's proper nutrition, and it doesn't mean you have to be a gym rat for 3 hours a day. It's walking, it's gardening, it's It's doing something that provides you movement. And when you combine those two, you lower all your cardiovascular risks, you improve your mood, you decrease depression, you reduce neurodegeneration. So all good things will come from that. And I think I hope on the other side of the debate, we can agree on this point, because I do think it's a critical point that the secretary is emphasizing and championing.
Yeah, and Eric Weinstein, I mean, he is RFK, a fine figure of a fit man for, what is he, 70 now? I mean, he looks great. He obviously practices by example. But I just think on this stuff, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, are you completely behind him?
Oh, I'm not a huge fan of the term no-brainer, but this is well beyond that. So my training is as an evolutionary biologist, and I think it is fair to say that the farther we are from the environment for which we are adapted, the more unhealthy we're going to be. And you can just look at the issue you point to with respect to bread rotting on the shelves. We've solved a supply chain problem at the expense of our health, and reversing it would no doubt improve health substantially. But I would also say that same logic applies across the board, that really, in one sense, the processed food question isn't different than the vaccine question. What we have, it is not part of your natural environment to have aluminum injected into your muscles. And what is the consequence for your health? It's negative. What does the science say? Well, mostly the science wasn't done. So we are left with an absence of evidence, which is not evidence of absence for the harms done by this. I would say, in general, being healthy is a matter of restoring a natural environment to the extent we are capable of doing it. And I'm all for it in any realm where we are pushing in that direction.
I totally agree with all of that, and I don't think you would get many people to actually disagree with that. I think, that RFK Jr., his biggest achievement is raising awareness about this ultra-processed food nonsense, and, that possibly leads to chronic disease. Like I said, don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. None of those things. But from everything that I've seen, that's where the evidence seems to be pointing in the direction that, getting off of these processed foods will be a very, very good thing. And I think our health outcomes, if you will, to use the term from the left, will be much, much better if we can get off of these ultra-processed foods. I love these discussions right here because you can learn so much from listening to these people. Like, once again, though, when you do listen to some of these people, like when they're just questioning things, that's all that is, folks. Don't think that, vaccines don't work or they're dangerous or anything like that. I mean, I was fully vaccinated. I was on that schedule. I'm just fine, right? That's anecdotal. Sure, I get it. That's not evidence-based. But look, there's been millions of people that take these vaccines, and it has saved many, many, many lives. So take that for what it is. Now, the COVID vaccine, that's a whole different beast, right? We could talk about that. It was rushed into existence. Look, I get it. There's many concerns because there's zero long-term studies done on these things. I'm talking really long-term because it was only 5 years ago, right? The longest-term study we could have is 5 years old. And, there was many inconsistencies in the messaging coming out, so many people have many, many questions. I never got vaccinated. I'm not going to lie about that. I don't think I ever had COVID. If I did, I didn't show any symptoms, so it is what it is. I'm maybe one of the few people that didn't. But this whole ultra-processed foods, I've tried to stay as far away from those as I can. Look, I get it. It's not the easiest thing to do because of convenience these modern days. It's convenient to go and get, McDonald's and Taco Bell and all this other stuff. It's really convenient. And it's harder to eat healthy, but, if you push those boundaries, you try to limit the amount of ultra-processed food that you take in, you can find options out there. It's definitely there. So that's a good suggestion, regardless of the science, that ultra-processed food can't really be good for you. I mean, at this point, I think that's pretty conclusive, if you ask me. But we're about to get into the whole Dave Farina section now. What I want to ask, let you guys know right off the jump, did either one of those dudes seem like a crackpotty grifter to you? That's all I'm going to say about this. Let's get into it.
Well, listening to my previous two guests and here to give his verdict on whether RFK is making America healthy again is Dave Farina, the host of Professor Dave Explains. Well, Dave, welcome to Uncensored.
Thanks for having me.
Your response to what you were just listening to?
I mean, where to begin? I'm familiar with Brett Weinstein. I'm not familiar with his opponent, but I know, I've dealt with him and his brother. They're peas in a pod. Brett just basically peddles conspiracies to generate a cult following online. A lot of what he said was absolutely ridiculous. He went on a tirade about, aluminum-based adjuvants not being tested. Absolutely not. They've been tested rigorously. They're shown to be safe. The levels of aluminum are comparable to what are ingested through breast milk by children, stuff like that. It's just basically his whole shtick is just kind of like, I'm just asking questions and look at all these things. And there's just absolutely no basis for it. I'm a little alarmed that both of them had anything positive to say about RFK. I don't think that there is really anything positive that you can say about him. He's been a complete train wreck, antithetical to the idea of public health in every way, shape, and form. So I'm sure that we're going to get into the specifics of how that is the case.
Well, I've got to say, I've interviewed him a number of times, RFK Jr. I went into it thinking that everything I read would mean I would have a crackpot in front of me espousing crackpot ideas. Actually, I didn't get that feeling from him. And I've watched very carefully the way that he has performed so far. The measles crisis was interesting because he took a bit of time, but then came down and publicly endorsed the vaccination, which I think surprised people. I completely agree with him that America needs to wean itself off over-processed food. I think he's right to try and get Americans fitter. America has shocking health rates, really, comparative to, say, Asian countries. The obesity rates are alarming. So there are lots of things where I find myself nodding to him. What is it about him that concerns you so much? Because obviously you don't agree with what I just said, but what concerns you so much?
So you just asked three separate questions, so I'll answer each of them. Number one, he absolutely is a crackpot. He has pushed miasma theory, terrain theory, pushed ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. He promotes raw milk. He continues to push lies about vaccines causing autism, just all manner of blatant pseudoscience. And he's leveraging his position to have this essentially is like a repeat of Stalin backing Lysenko, where you have this sort of state-sanctioned pseudoscience trying to usurp actual science. And that's what we're seeing with all of the layoffs, discarding the entire vaccine safety panel. You have even top experts like Peter Marks saying, and I quote, "It has become clear that truth and transparency are not desired by the secretary, but rather he wishes subservient confirmation of his misinformation and lies." So he's just surrounding himself with yes men that will promote pseudoscience. He's even threatening to ban federal scientists from publishing research in respected journals, demanding they publish in the state-sanctioned alternative. So this is all driving scientific talent out of the country, preventing people from emigrating here to be part of the scientific community. It's very disastrous, the pseudoscience. But then speaking to what you said about vaccines and ultra-processed foods, his vaccine rhetoric is directly responsible for deaths. And you guys have been focusing on the Texas outbreak, but let's not forget the Samoa outbreak, where he is absolutely 100% directly responsible for 83 deaths over there. He is the one who went over there, met with anti-vaccine advocates, and pushed this false narrative about the outbreak being due to a vaccine rather than actual measles. 83 deaths on his head, no remorse. Over here in Texas, right, obviously he, when he gets cornered, he's going to backtrack and say, oh, no, by the way, MMR is fine, everybody should get it. But he's the one pushing all of these long debunked conspiracies about the autism thing, which goes all the way back to Andrew Wakefield, the massive fraud from your neck of the woods. And then to go to ultra-processed foods. Look, this is the one thing where it's like, yeah, junk food is bad for you. Are we going to give this guy a medal for saying that junk food is bad for you? Everybody knows that, right? I mean, it's like, what is like, it also speaks to the hypocrisy of the right as well, though, because, not like this huge fan of Michelle Obama or anything, but she had an initiative to make school lunches more healthy, and Republicans jumped on her. Federal overreach, big government, all this stuff. And now RFK comes around and says, oh, yeah, by the way, junk food is bad. And everyone's clapping and cheering like he's some kind of messiah. What is the plan here? Ban fast food, ban soda, ban ice cream? I don't think that his orange boss would be too pleased if McDonald's is outlawed. So what's the end goal here, right? This is just rhetoric to try to make it seem like he's on the side of the public when he just absolutely isn't, right? He pretends to be this bulwark fighting against big pharma and everybody in the private industry. But as soon as he gets the reins, as soon as he gets the keys to the castle, what does he do? He guts all of the federal institutions that are meant to protect the public against the private sector. Thousands of layoffs at the FDA, at the CDC, right, the entire vaccine panel. What's happened to the vaccine panel? He replaced them with Robert Malone, all these other frauds. Then if these vaccines are no longer recommended, then low-income families, low-income children don't have access to them for free anymore. So all of this rhetoric about not wanting to take vaccines away from people, it's actually specifically what he's doing. So all of it is a facade, all of it.
Okay, so the vast majority of that was just sophistry, and it pains me to say this because I like Dave a lot. I really, really do. He's logical. He's done really, really good with a lot of things, but this is just sophistry. That's all that is. To blame an outbreak of measles on a single guy. He just got into office. But to blame it on RFK Jr. directly, he is directly responsible for this. How can he be directly responsible for this? He had just came into office. The outbreak started before he went there. Dave, for goodness sakes. Sure, did you not like his response? Oh, that's the problem. You didn't like his response. That doesn't mean that he is directly responsible for that. That's just ridiculous, right? Once again, Dave, he is a lawyer. He is running the agency. He is not the expert on these things. He gives statements based upon advice from the experts and his own studies and his own knowledge, blah, 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 blah. You get it, right? You can't go and blaming that on him when that outbreak started before he even showed up, right? And he had just come into office. So that's just a ridiculous ad hominem attack right there, and a bit of sophistry, if you will. But let's go on to the next thing he was talking about here. All of these conspiracy theories that he's pushing, right? If you go and listen to RFK Jr., he's not pushing conspiracy theories. Just because you get on a podcast, they ask you some questions about a conspiracy theory, and then you start to expound upon that conspiracy theory, doesn't mean that you're pushing a conspiracy theory. It means you're talking and discussing a conspiracy theory and, the ins and outs and what's all going on. I'm not going to break all that stuff down, but it's ridiculous. Go and listen to the man speak, for crying out loud, right? They constantly say, oh, he's anti-vax. And he'll constantly say he's not anti-vax. What he wants is safe vaccines, 100% safe vaccines. Can we get that? I don't know, but I think it's a good idea to push in that direction. Once again, like I broke down earlier, he wants the studies done. He wants the safety tests that the government conducted. He wants those released, and apparently they're not releasing these. Once again, you go and look at the studies. A lot of people will say that those studies are not conclusive. What do you glean from that when you see a study that's not conclusive? Well, sure, most of the evidence might point in a certain direction. Well, that means we're probably on to something. Maybe we should keep researching this and keep going and tell people that, hey, this study was done, it says this, it points in this direction, but it was inconclusive. But instead, because we ask questions, legitimate questions, we're called a crackpot and a lunatic. Oh, we're pushing conspiracy theories. Dave, look, I'm sorry. I love you, brother. But look, that's just not the case. Asking questions is very, very different than pushing conspiracy theories. And I love how he says, well, once again, it's sophistry. What are we going to do? Ban fast food? Ban junk food? No, but he pretends that everybody knows that this food is bad. No, I'm sorry, Dave. Not everybody is smart. Not everybody reads these studies. Not everybody has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master's degree in science education. Not everybody is on your level, Dave. I mean, for crying out loud, some people are stupid and just don't know this. Look, I'm sorry to say it, but some people are stupid. That's it. Not everybody knows this, but the fact that he's raising the awareness and shouting from the rooftops that, yes, this stuff is bad, that's a good thing. Why are you trying to use that as a bludgeon to disparage the man? Just because you think that he's pushing conspiracy theories when he's really not. Just listen to what the guy says. Don't just hear a few words of him talking about a conspiracy theory and then go on and lie and say, oh, he's just pushing conspiracy theories. Listen to what the people have to say fully and understand, comprehend what they're saying before you rush to judgment. That's all I got to say about that. Let's keep going, y'all.
I guess my overview would be, if the experts have been so expert in America in terms of health in the last 50 years, why is America so unhealthy?
Okay, again, that's like three different questions. First of all, what you're attributing to the scientific community is actually just a couple of things that Biden said offhand, right? In terms of you won't get infected, things like that. That's not what doctors said. Okay, leaving the why Americans are so unhealthy thing for later, we should talk about mRNA vaccines, because you just had Brett Weinstein on, and he is one of the main purveyors of all of these lies and conspiracies about, fabricating all of these millions of deaths and all of these other things. His opponent was a little more reasonable in terms of discussing the COVID vaccines. So in terms of we absolutely cannot deny the efficacy and the success in saving millions of lives for these COVID vaccines, especially at this lightning speed in which they were produced, where other therapies did fail. So we to talk as though that's not true is ridiculous. But then looking at this, 500 million cut for future, you had a clip of someone else talking about all of these other alternate therapies that we're not going to get anymore because this was cut. I mean, this is absolutely indefensible, right? There is a kernel of truth to some of the rhetoric about the mRNA vaccines in terms of the uridine pseudouridine, the N-methyl pseudouridine swap, which is responsible for the spike protein lingering longer than we expected. It's found 6 months later in muscle tissue and things like that. So that was a bit unexpected. But how do you? And by the way, all of the side effects have been completely overblown by frauds like Brett Weinstein, completely fabricated. All of these, the myocarditis and all this stuff, just complete false rhetoric, right? So it's not that there's nothing there, right? We can talk about why is this spike protein hanging around longer than we expected to, but how do you answer that question? You do more research, right? You study it. You don't gut the FDA and CDC. You don't have billions of dollars of budget cuts. You don't push brilliant scientists out of the country and prevent other brilliant foreign scientists from coming into the country due to RFK's policies and Trump's attitude towards immigrants. It's just a complete mess. I mean, it's a deterioration of the American scientific community right before our eyes, and RFK and Trump's administration are directly responsible for it. That's really all there is to it. As far what was the last?
Okay, so this is how you know it's sophistry, because Dave comes in, he says, oh, he's just pushing a bunch of lies. Well, there was this one concern with this one thing that he was actually talking about, but he's just pushing a bunch of lies. It's all just nonsense. Don't trust this guy. Appeal to authority. That is the highest authority in the land, for crying out loud. Dave, come on, look. Asking questions, once again, is very, very different than pushing lies. Come on, my dude. Get with the program here, my guy. Seriously. Let's keep going.
The big picture point was about why, if the experts have been so expert, why is America so unhealthy?
I mean, look, it's poverty, right? America is absolutely unique among the world powers in terms of, number one, not having, affordable health care. It's not having access to healthy food, not having access to affordable health care. This is what's driving health concerns. So if we want to address these things, obviously we have to figure out how to make healthcare better. And so that involves standing up to health insurance industries and things like that. But also just kind of taking it more seriously. If we want to understand, right, RFK pushes this, this explosion in chronic disease, 54% prevalence, and it's all magically lined up with 1989 in the vaccine schedule and junk food. It's complete rubbish. I mean, we know junk food isn't good for you, right? That's not news. And okay, what are you going to do? Like enforce laws that prevent people from manufacturing and eating fast food? Good luck with that if you want to try that. But more importantly, why don't we research the genetic basis for a lot of these diseases? Things, certainly behavioral and neurological diseases, are largely genetic. And then even stuff like obesity has a very large genetic component. Why aren't we researching that more? And then just ultimately economics. I mean, I'd say post-World War II, just America has become this venue where, the oligarchy is just consistently vying for supremacy here, specifically being that U.S. is the, at the moment remains, I believe, the premier global power. That may change soon or is already in the process of changing. But that's why we see this continued transference of wealth from the masses into the oligarchy. And that's going to generate incredible amounts of poverty. And with that, you don't have access to healthy food. You don't have access to healthcare. That's the main problem. That's what we should be focusing on.
So, Dave, exactly what are you trying to say here? You come out, come on, blaming health outcomes on poverty, for crying out loud, and then go on to say, oh, well, most of these are genetic. Like, what? Are you freaking kidding me with this? Come on, can we get some consistency here? Look, I get it. It's all inconclusive. The studies, they're not conclusive. We don't know why some of the health outcomes are the way they are. That is pretending that rich people don't get sick. That money can fix anything. Come on, look, I understand the healthcare system that we have. It does need to be much better because it is simply based on keeping people on medicine, keeping them dependent on that healthcare system instead of getting them off the healthcare system. Instead of curing people, it's more about keeping our pockets lined. I totally get that. But that's, once again, that's not RFK Jr.'s fault. And then he goes on, going back to a previous clip, talking about Trump and immigration policy. He's trying to push away scientists. That was just a blatant lie. All of that they're just trying to push science away. They don't want science. It's all pseudoscience. Nonsense. That's all nonsense. If you look at what Donald Trump is actually doing, right, Dave, think about this for a second. Okay, so we're currently spending in a $1.8 trillion deficit. Can that continue indefinitely, my dude? No, it cannot. We need to make some cuts somewhere. So what Donald Trump said, we're going to make cuts all the way across the board. Look, I don't agree with a lot of the cuts. I don't think NASA needs to be cut. I don't think the science needs to be cut. But we must make the cuts because we cannot continue to fund our government if we continue down the path of deficit spending our way into bankruptcy, for crying out loud. Do you know what that means, Dave? Do you understand what a country going bankrupt would mean? Yeah, that means your life is destroyed. Your ability to make money on YouTube, gone. Bye-bye. That means most people don't get health care because nobody can afford to do so. They can only afford to survive for as long as they can afford to survive, for crying out loud. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to prevent. Sure, is it mean? Yeah, if you want to view it mean, go right ahead. Be my guest and view it as, oh, he's just a big meanie that he wants to kick out immigrants, people that decided to violate our laws, violate our good nature, enter this country illegally, and then start committing crimes, right? That's the people that Donald Trump is deporting. He's not deporting scientists. Come on, dude, get off of the sophistry, for crying out loud. Seriously. Pardon my French on this, but that kind of crap just pisses me off. That's all Dave is doing. He's just riding that dildo of sophistry all the way down the pipeline, and it really ticks me off that somebody as respectable as Dave Farina, Professor Dave, is going to go down this path of half-truths and sophistry, for crying out loud, just to make a point that, oh, the right is bad, Donald Trump is evil. It's all ridiculousness. Let's be a little bit more objective. That's what you're supposed to be, Dave, for crying out loud. Like I said, I really do like Dave. I'll still watch his content to this day. And not just his debunking of flat earth nonsense, right? Those are fun, sure. But he puts out legitimate educational content. that saves people money. That's tremendously commendable on his behalf. It really, really is. But when you do things like this and you slather your partisanship over your objectivity, that ruins your reputation, Dave. It seriously does. Look, like I said, I really like Dave a lot. That really ticked me off, all that partisan nonsense. It's hackery, if you will. You want me to call you a grifter? Because, hey, I've got evidence that does point in that direction. Because you used to not make all these debunk videos until you started getting millions of views, my dude. And then you started producing many of them, right? We're all slaves to the algorithm, for crying out loud. But I'm not going to levy that accusation upon Dave, because I understand. I totally understand. You see, you make a video, it gets a lot of clicks, so you're going to make more videos that gets a lot of clicks. As a matter of fact, that is the entire reason I cover Piers Morgan, because those videos get much more views than my regular content does. That's all it is to it. I do enjoy doing these, though. That is secondary to the main reason. Secondary. Because I do enjoy doing these. Just like with my other content, my committee hearing videos that I just started doing. I enjoy Rebuttal. I love it. I really, really do. Even sometimes when I don't totally believe it. I will make an argument. I play devil's advocate sometimes, sure. It is what it is. But, you know, let's be a little bit more objective here, my dude. Sure, is Trump perfect? Abso-freaking-lutely not. There are many aspects of the Trump administration that I would love that changed. But is the Trump administration evil? And are they, promoting pseudoscience? No. They're not promoting conspiracy theories just because they discuss conspiracy theories sometimes. It's ridiculous, y'all. It really, really is. But I think I've rambled on for long enough. Y'all let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. Let me know how wrong I am. And, if somebody out there, a Dave fan, hey, let Dave respond to this. I would love that. I would love to hear a response to some of my arguments. Good luck. That's all I'm going to say about that. Good luck with that. But that's all I got. Y'all make sure and smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you feel so inclined to do so. That would be great. I'd love to have you on board. Sign up, become a member. That would be even better. I'd love you to death. And y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.